Before central heating, thermostats, and modern insulation, our medieval ancestors faced brutally cold winters with nothing but raw ingenuity, natural resources, and a strong will to survive. And yet, many of their heating methods weren't just effective, they were brilliant. In this video, we'll uncover 20 forgotten ways medieval people kept warm, some of which are so efficient they might just outdo your modern furnace. Let's dive into a time when warmth was earned through wisdom. The central hearth, the heart of the home. In the medieval world, the hearth wasn't just a fireplace, it was the soul of the home. Positioned at the center of the main living space, the hearth served as the primary source of heat for both cooking and comfort. It was a place where stories were told, meals were prepared, and families gathered to stay warm through long, freezing nights. Before chimneys were widely used, smoke from the hearth would rise and escape through a hole in the roof, or simply seep out through the thatch. This might sound unpleasant to us today, but the smoke had a secondary function. It helped insulate the home by driving away pests and even preserve the wooden beams by drying them out. A centrally located hearth radiated heat in all directions. People would arrange their activities and furniture in a circular pattern around it, maximizing exposure to warmth. It was also strategically placed to heat not just the immediate space, but the rooms and lofts above it, as heat naturally rose. In larger homes and castles, the hearth was massive, burning entire logs over many hours. In peasant cottages, it was smaller, but no less vital. Everything from porridge to medicine was prepared over its flames. In a time without thermostats or gas heaters, controlling the size and intensity of your fire was a true skill, handed down from generation to generation. The hearth was a place of survival, connection, and ritual. It was often the first thing built in a new home, and the last thing extinguished. For medieval people, the central hearth was not just a way to heat the house, it was the house. Radiant heat from stone walls and floors. Long before modern underfloor heating systems, medieval builders intuitively harnessed the power of radiant heat, especially in castles and monasteries made of thick stone. These stone structures weren't just for defense. They were incredibly efficient at absorbing and slowly releasing warmth. When a fire was lit in a room with stone walls or floors, the stone would absorb that heat throughout the day. Even after the fire died down, the residual warmth remained, gently radiating back into the space. This created a slow, steady heat that could last well into the night, something a modern HVAC system would envy for its efficiency. In some buildings, such as Roman-inspired monasteries or bathhouses, hot air was deliberately funneled under stone floors using hypocaust systems. But even in simpler homes, builders understood that placing fires near stone helped create a thermal battery. The thicker the stone, the more heat it could hold. Some castles even had heat pockets, or stone benches built directly into the walls near the hearth. These warmed up quickly and became favorite spots to sit during harsh winters. This method required patience and planning. Fires had to be tended early in the day to charge the walls with heat before the sun went down. But once warmed, the walls created a cocoon of comfort, protecting residents from biting winds and freezing temperatures. It's a reminder that sometimes the coldest-looking materials, like cold gray stone, can actually be the warmest allies when used with wisdom. 3. Bed warmers, the original heated blanket. Before the age of electric blankets and central heating, medieval families had to get creative about staying warm in bed. One of the most clever and surprisingly effective solutions was the bed warmer, a metal pan filled with glowing coals, designed to be placed under the blankets before sleep. These bed warmers were often crafted from brass or copper, with long wooden handles to keep hands safe from the heat. Just before bedtime, someone in the family, often the eldest child or the mother, would scoop hot embers from the hearth, place them into the bed warmer, and slide it slowly between the sheets. The idea wasn't to leave it in the bed all night, That would have been dangerous. Instead, the goal was to preheat the sheets, chase away the chill, and make it bearable to crawl under the covers. In the dead of winter, this simple ritual made the difference between shivering in misery and falling asleep in comfort. The warmer also symbolized care and love. Preparing a warm bed for children or elders was a gesture of deep affection and responsibility. In wealthier homes, servants were assigned the task. In poorer homes, it was done with careful attention because every ember was precious. Interestingly, this method also influenced how people built their beds. Many beds had thick, insulated mattresses stuffed with straw or wool, and heavy woolen or fur blankets on top. The bed warmer would turn this cocoon into a toasty haven, just long enough to help the sleeper drift off before their own body heat took over. Simple, ancient, and oddly luxurious, bed warmers remind us that warmth doesn't always come from machines. Sometimes, it comes from glowing embers and a little bit of effort. 4. Tapestries as insulation. To the modern eye, tapestries seem like medieval art, grand, decorative, and symbolic. But in reality, they were also a functional necessity. Thick tapestries, often woven from wool or linen, were a key form of insulation in the drafty stone halls and chambers of castles and manors. Stone walls may have been durable and imposing, but they were also cold. Freezing winds would seep through cracks and joints, and the sheer mass of the stone sucked heat away from the air. To combat this, medieval households hung tapestries like internal shields, covering large portions of wall space with fabric to trap warmth and block drafts. These weren't thin sheets. Some tapestries were inches thick and took months or even years to complete. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but their placement was strategic. They were often hung near doorways, behind beds, or along corridors where air movement was strongest. In some cases, tapestries were even layered, one on top of another, to create thick fabric walls. This layering added color and beauty to interiors, but more importantly, it turned frigid chambers into livable, semi-warm spaces. Monasteries and noble households often commissioned tapestries with religious or historical themes, adding meaning to their warmth. A scene of saints or kings could literally keep you warm at night. It's a fascinating example of form meeting function. The medieval tapestry wasn't just decoration. It was insulation disguised as elegance. 5. Straw and rush floors. One of the simplest, yet most effective heating strategies used in the Middle Ages was the humble straw or rush floor. To us, it may sound messy or even primitive, but to medieval families, it was a vital layer of comfort and warmth between their feet and the freezing ground. Most homes didn't have wooden floors. Instead, they had bare earth, and earth, especially during winter, pulls heat away from the body. So medieval people scattered dried rushes, straw, or even herbs across the floor to act as natural insulation. These materials added a soft cushion underfoot and significantly reduced heat loss. The straw floor had another hidden advantage. It absorbed moisture. Cold dampness rising from the earth was one of the most bone-chilling experiences, and these dry, fibrous layers helped trap and neutralize that dampness. Over time, the rushes were mixed with daily debris, bits of food, ashes, even dropped items. So they were regularly swept out and replaced. In wealthier homes, the rushes were changed seasonally, with aromatic herbs like lavender or rosemary added to improve the scent and deter pests. Some churches even adopted this method. In fact, the term strewing rushes became associated with festivals and special occasions, where the floor would be freshly layered with green rushes for both warmth and ceremony. Though it might seem unsanitary to modern standards, the rush floor was a remarkably clever adaptation. It made icy rooms warmer, grounded people in nature, and created a renewable, biodegradable way to keep homes livable through the coldest months. 6. Heated stones in bed. Nature's hot water bottle. Before hot water bottles and electric pads, medieval people used one of the most enduring, natural sources of warmth: Heated stones. Simple yet effective, this method involved placing large, smooth stones into the fire, letting them absorb heat for hours, and then carefully transferring them, often wrapped in cloth, into beds, blankets, or even under cloaks. These stones, especially river rocks or granite, retained heat remarkably well. After wrapping the stone in linen or wool to prevent burns, it was tucked under the sheets or placed at the foot of the bed. There, it released its heat slowly through the night, helping sleepers stay warm in homes that otherwise had no central heating or insulation. This wasn't just a hack for peasants. Nobles used this trick too, especially in cold stone castles where bedrooms were often far from the main hearth. Servants would prepare the heated stones in advance, carefully monitoring their temperature to ensure they were warm, but not scalding. In some traditions, these heated stones weren't only placed in beds, but also under cloaks for travelers or underfoot in carriages. Some people even placed them inside their boots before venturing out, creating an early version of heated footwear. It's a method that uses nothing but fire, stone, and a little patience, and it worked wonders. Even today, people in off-grid communities still use hot rocks as a source of warmth. It's another case of medieval ingenuity that modern tech hasn't fully replaced. 7. Canopy beds with curtains, medieval microclimates. The coldest part of any medieval home was often the bedroom. Bedrooms were rarely heated, especially in castles or large manors. But people didn't just lie there and shiver. They built canopy beds with curtains to create their own little insulated world. These four-poster beds weren't just decorative or luxurious, they were survival tools. The bed structure allowed thick curtains to be drawn around all four sides, creating an enclosed space where body heat could be trapped and recycled throughout the night. Once inside, a person's own warmth, combined with perhaps a heated stone or woolen blanket, would slowly heat the small enclosed area, while the curtains blocked drafts and prevented heat from escaping. It was the medieval equivalent of sleeping inside a personal tent within your home. In colder regions, beds were placed in alcoves or small nooks to limit exposure to outside walls. Children often slept with parents or siblings, further increasing shared body heat inside the enclosed bed. For nobles and royalty, these canopy beds were heavily draped with thick velvet, fur, or woolen fabrics. In peasant homes, curtains were more likely made of linen or burlap, but the principle was the same. Contain the heat, block the cold, and sleep like royalty, even if you weren't one. It was a brilliant use of architecture and textiles to turn a freezing room into a warm cocoon, and one that many would consider adopting again in off-grid living or during energy crises. 8. Cloister design for heat retention, monastic wisdom. While castles were built for defense and grandeur, monasteries were built for function and reflection, and part of that meant staying warm in freezing conditions. One of the most fascinating architectural designs from medieval times was the cloister, a square or rectangular courtyard surrounded by covered walkways that acted as both spiritual and thermal sanctuaries. The cloister design helped retain heat in several ways. First, by creating a sheltered, enclosed space, monks were protected from harsh winds and external temperature fluctuations. Second, the inner courtyard allowed for passive solar heating during the day, with sunlight warming the surrounding stone walls and floors. But there's more. The covered walkways and tightly packed buildings created windbreaks and thermal corridors. Heat generated from fireplaces, kitchens, or even human bodies would be better contained due to limited air circulation and reduced exposure. Monks would spend hours studying or copying manuscripts in cloisters, sometimes wrapped in robes and wool. But the architecture itself did much of the work. It trapped and preserved warmth like a naturally designed thermal bottle. This layout wasn't accidental. It was the result of centuries of monastic engineering, where self-sufficiency and endurance were key. Cloisters were not only spiritual sanctuaries, they were thermodynamic masterpieces of the medieval world. 9. Animal heat in shared living spaces. Warmth on four legs. In the colder parts of medieval Europe, many peasant families lived with their animals under the same roof. And while this might sound strange to us today, it was incredibly practical. Livestock, especially cows, sheep, and pigs, generate body heat. And when winter temperatures dropped below freezing, every bit of warmth counted. The typical setup involved a two-part home, one side for the family, the other for the animals, separated by a low wall or a simple partition. The animal's body heat would warm the air, and with few barriers, that heat would rise and spread to the family's sleeping quarters. This method had multiple benefits. First, animals were protected from the cold and predators. Second, families had easy access to their most valuable resources, milk, wool, meat, without stepping into snow or rain. And third, both humans and animals contributed to the shared warmth of the household. In many ways, this was an ancient version of geothermal or biothermal heating. The body temperatures of cows, roughly 101.5 grades or 38.6 degrees, made a noticeable difference in small enclosed spaces. Chickens and pigs added even more warmth, especially when housed in groups. While wealthier households could afford separate barns, for the majority of medieval people, their survival strategy involved collaboration with their animals. It was messy, sure, but it was efficient. And in the brutal grip of winter, warmth trumped everything else. 10. Hippocaust, heating in monastic baths. Ancient tech revived. You might think central heating began in the industrial age, but monks in medieval Europe knew better. Drawing inspiration from ancient Roman engineering, some monasteries developed their own version of the hypocaust system, a brilliant method of underfloor heating that warmed entire rooms from below. Here's how it worked. A furnace was built outside or in the basement of a structure. Hot air and smoke from this furnace were channeled through a series of stone or brick ducts built beneath the floors. As the air flowed through, it heated the floor above, often made of stone or tile, which then radiated warmth upward into the room. The hypocaust was primarily used in monastic bathhouses or infirmaries, where heat was essential for comfort and healing. In some cases, hot water from nearby springs or kettles was used to amplify the system, providing a sauna-like experience that was both spiritual and therapeutic. This technology required serious planning, labor, and maintenance, so it wasn't found in every monastery, but where it was implemented, it offered one of the most advanced heating systems of the time. The beauty of the hypocaust was in its indirect nature. No smoke in the room, no open flames, just a gentle, rising heat that made cold stone buildings feel almost luxurious. Today, it stands as a testament to the forgotten genius of medieval engineers and their respect for ancient wisdom. 11. Small rooms, thick walls, built for warmth. When it came to surviving brutal winters, medieval builders knew something we often forget. The bigger the space, the harder it is to heat. That's why many medieval homes, especially among the peasantry, featured small rooms with thick, dense walls, a deceptively simple design that was incredibly effective. Small rooms meant there was less air to heat and less space for heat to escape. A single fire, or even the body heat from a few people, could quickly raise the temperature. Families often huddled together in one room through the coldest months, using every trick, from layered bedding to body heat, to keep the space warm. Meanwhile, the walls themselves, often constructed from stone, wattle, and daub, or even packed earth, played a critical role in temperature regulation. Thick walls absorbed heat from fires and the sun during the day, then released it slowly at night. And in summer, those same walls kept interiors cool. It was ancient insulation at its finest. Windows were small, sometimes no more than narrow slits. This wasn't just for defense. It was to reduce drafts and prevent precious heat from escaping. Many homes also had low ceilings, which helped trap warm air closer to the ground where people slept and worked. In an age without insulation, foam, or fiberglass, architecture itself became the heater. Homes were compact, solid, and designed with survival in mind. What they lacked in square footage, they made up for in efficiency. Chapter 12. Southern-facing windows, ancient solar heating. Long before solar panels and passive houses, medieval builders had already mastered the art of passive solar heating. One of their simplest, smartest tricks? Southern-facing windows. In the northern hemisphere, the sun travels across the southern part of the sky. By positioning windows, especially the few that existed, to face south, homes could capture the maximum amount of sunlight during the day. This natural light didn't just brighten rooms, it warmed them too. Sunlight streaming through these windows would heat up interior surfaces like stone walls, wooden beams, and furniture. These materials, especially stone, would then radiate that heat back into the room after the sun went down. It was a completely free, natural form of heating that required no firewood, no labor, just an understanding of how the sun moved. In castles and manors, larger windows with glass, a luxury at the time, were often installed on the south side for this reason. In peasant homes, even small openings covered with animal skins or oiled parchment were strategically placed to catch those precious rays. Some medieval architects even staggered the placement of rooms so that the most used spaces, like kitchens or living areas, got the most sun exposure. Bedrooms, by contrast, were often placed on the cooler, northern sides of buildings, where less heat was needed during the day. It's a simple principle that modern sustainable design has embraced. Let the sun do the heating when it can. The medieval world already knew this well. 13. Cooking as heating, warmth from the hearth. In the medieval home, cooking wasn't just about food. It was a daily heating ritual. Every time a fire was lit to boil water, bake bread, or stew meat, it also served a second, and sometimes more important, purpose: keeping the home warm. Most homes had a central hearth or oven that burned for hours each day. Cooking wasn't quick. It took time to prepare ingredients, heat water, and simmer meals. And while this process was going on, the entire home benefited from the radiant heat. Stone ovens in particular were fantastic heat sources. Once fired up, the stone retained heat long after the fire went out, much like modern pizza ovens or masonry stoves. In some households, the residual warmth was used to dry clothes, warm blankets, or simply keep the family comfortable. In wealthier homes or monasteries, large kitchens were deliberately located adjacent to living quarters. That way, the heat from constant cooking could filter through walls and corridors, warming nearby rooms. And in poorer homes, the hearth was almost always the only source of both food and warmth. Meals were timed strategically, cooking breakfast early to heat the home in the morning, and preparing dinner before sunset to carry warmth into the evening. It's a brilliant example of energy efficiency in a world that had no choice but to be efficient. Nothing was wasted. Not food, not fire, and certainly not heat. 14. Hot drinks and stews, warming the body from within. Sometimes, the best way to fight the cold is from the inside out. While open fires and warm beds helped heat medieval homes, the people themselves relied heavily on hot drinks and stews to keep their bodies warm, especially during the long, dark winter months. Herbal teas, mulled wines, broths, and thick stews were staples of the medieval diet, not just for nourishment, but for warmth. Drinking something hot raised core body temperature, improved circulation, and offered a psychological comfort that was just as important as physical heat. In peasant homes, stews simmered all day over the hearth, made from whatever ingredients were available: root vegetables, grains, dried meat, or fish. These perpetual stews were never completely finished. Each day, new ingredients were added, and the pot was kept bubbling. The steam warmed the room, and the food warmed the soul. In monasteries, warm herbal infusions were used not only for health, but also as a form of internal heat regulation. Spiced drinks, like mead, cider, or ale, were often heated and consumed before bed or during communal gatherings. And let's not forget porridge, A medieval breakfast staple. Warm, filling, and easy to digest, it gave people energy and internal heat to face the frozen dawn. In a world without modern medicine or insulation, keeping warm wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. Hot food and drink were more than meals, they were lifelines. 15. Communal sleeping, body heat for survival. Forget personal space. When winter hit, communal sleeping was a necessity. Whether you were a peasant, a soldier, or a pilgrim, the rule was simple. If you want to survive the cold, sleep together. Families, especially poor ones, would often sleep in the same bed or on shared pallets covered in straw. Children slept with parents, siblings huddled under the same blanket. In some cases, even guests or neighbors joined in during particularly frigid nights. The reason was simple: body heat. The human body emits warmth, and when several bodies are grouped closely together, they create a kind of natural heating system. Sharing a bed, especially a curtained one, created a warm, enclosed environment where that heat could be retained through the night. Even in monasteries, monks sometimes slept in dormitory-style halls, where dozens of bodies helped keep the air warmer. In inns and taverns, travelers who couldn't afford private rooms often shared beds with strangers. It wasn't considered inappropriate. It was just survival. In castles and noble homes, servants would sometimes sleep near the doors or fireplaces of their masters' chambers, providing both protection and warmth. In children's rooms, trundle beds could be pulled out from under larger beds, keeping everyone close together. This method might seem uncomfortable or awkward to us today, but in the bitter cold of a medieval winter, nothing was more precious than shared warmth. It was heat, closeness, and protection, all wrapped in one. 16. Window shutters and animal skins. Fighting the drafts. Glass was a rare luxury in the Middle Ages, and even when available, it was thick, cloudy, and poorly insulated. That meant windows were one of the greatest sources of heat loss in any home. So how did medieval people fight off the chilling drafts? With wooden shutters and animal skins. During the day, small windows might be left open to let in light and fresh air. But as soon as the sun dipped, shutters were swung closed. Thick, solid wood that formed a second barrier against the wind. In some homes, especially those of the poor, these shutters were the only covering. There was no glass at all, just a hole in the wall, sealed manually each evening. For even more insulation, people covered windows with stretched animal skins, like sheepskin or parchment. These translucent materials allowed some light in, but helped block out wind and moisture. In colder regions, additional layers of cloth or wool were tacked up over windows, like miniature tapestries designed specifically to keep out the cold. It was a practical and effective system. By nightfall, a medieval home would be sealed tight, with every window shuttered, every draft plugged. Even a flickering fire burned more efficiently when the wind was locked outside. This technique teaches a powerful lesson. When heating options are limited, blocking heat loss is just as important as generating warmth. And sometimes, the best insulation isn't synthetic. It's something nature already gave us. 17. Warm clothing indoors. Dressing for the season. Modern heating has spoiled us into thinking we can wear t-shirts year-round. But in medieval times, people had a very different relationship with winter. They dressed for the cold, even inside their homes. Layering was the norm. People wore long woolen tunics, thick socks, cloaks, and fur-lined caps indoors. Gloves and mittens were common, and many even wore small hoods or coif to keep their heads warm. Clothes weren't removed until it was absolutely necessary, because stripping down meant inviting the cold straight in. In wealthier homes, garments were custom-made for insulation. Fur from animals like rabbit, fox, or sheep was stitched into cloaks and linings. Linen undergarments were layered beneath woolen overgarments to trap body heat. Some coats were so heavy, they were practically wearable blankets. Children were often bundled up like little walking parcels, and older folks kept warm by staying near the hearth with extra wraps. In especially cold weather, people even slept in most of their clothing, removing only outer layers and boots. The mindset was simple but effective. Rather than trying to heat an entire house, heat your body. It's a principle that still works today, and a smart way to cut energy costs or survive in an off-grid environment. 18. Sunken living areas. Earth as insulation. Some medieval homes featured an architectural trick that modern eco-designers still admire. Sunken living areas, parts of the home built below ground level. Why? Because the earth itself is one of nature's best insulators. By building into the earth, homes gained natural protection from wind and temperature fluctuations. The soil surrounding the lower walls kept the interior cooler in summer and, more importantly, warmer in winter. Even just a few feet below the surface, the temperature of the earth stays relatively stable year-round. Many peasant homes, particularly in colder regions, were partially dug into hillsides or built with sunken floors. These structures, sometimes called dugouts or half-houses, were easier to warm with a small fire or even just body heat. Some cellars or pantries were also used as makeshift sleeping areas during bitterly cold nights. Though dark and cramped, these earth-insulated spaces were surprisingly cozy. Today, this principle lives on in earth-sheltered homes and passive solar architecture, but medieval folk knew it instinctively. If you can't beat the cold, hide from it in the ground. 19. Fireplaces with chimneys, redirecting the heat. It might surprise you to learn that chimneys weren't always part of medieval homes. In fact, they didn't become common until the 12th or 13th century. Before that, smoke from a fire simply drifted through holes in the roof. But once fireplaces with chimneys were introduced, everything changed. The chimney allowed smoke to be drawn upward and out of the home instead of filling the room. This made it possible to build enclosed fireplaces that were far more efficient at heating. Instead of escaping through every gap and window, heat from the fire could now circulate within the room. The design of the fireplace evolved over time, becoming deeper, more angled, and lined with stone to radiate warmth. Chimneys also allowed for multiple fireplaces throughout a home, often stacked on different floors and sharing a common flue. In castles and monasteries, this led to dedicated hearths in kitchens, bedrooms, and great halls. Even in smaller cottages, a single fireplace with a chimney made an enormous difference, not just in heat output, but in safety and air quality. It was a monumental leap in home heating, and a cornerstone of warmth in the later medieval period. The humble chimney was more than an escape route for smoke. It was a gateway to a cozier life. 20. Hay or wool stuffed mattresses and walls. Natural insulation. Last, but certainly not least, let's talk about the power of stuffing, specifically hay, straw, and wool. These natural materials weren't just for sleeping on, they were key to medieval insulation, both in beds and even in walls. Medieval mattresses were often thick sacks filled with hay, straw, or wool. These materials trapped air and provided a barrier between the cold ground and the sleeper's body. Unlike modern memory foam, these beds weren't soft, but they were warm, and that was what mattered. In colder regions, people took this a step further by packing wool or straw into the walls themselves. Between inner and outer layers of wattle and daub, insulation material was added to trap heat and block out wind. In some homes, spare cloths or rugs were hung or stuffed into wall crevices to reduce drafts even further. This DIY insulation was surprisingly effective. Wool, in particular, is a phenomenal thermal regulator. It retains heat even when damp and helps maintain a consistent interior temperature. Combined with everything else, small rooms, warm clothes, enclosed beds, this strategy formed the final layer of a complex, holistic system of surviving the cold. No part of the home was wasted. Everything, even the mattress, served the greater goal of warmth. These 20 forgotten medieval heating methods weren't just clever, they were essential. In an age without electricity, without fossil fuels, and without convenience, people turn to nature, design, and community to stay warm. And in many ways, their wisdom still holds up. So the next time your furnace kicks on, remember, warmth isn't just about tech. It's about how you use what you've got.